Dunkey is a bad critic is a statement that gets thrown around a lot, or at least variants of it. There are typically a handful of points that get used, like why is Dunkey reviewing a JRPG when he doesn't like JRPGs, and he was just too nitpicking and biased in his reviews. And although Dunkey has a lot he can be criticized for, I feel like a significant portion of people don't do a good job of talking about Dunkey's pros and cons. And a lot of this discussion tends to get frustrating quickly due to a lack of middle ground and people not fully analyzing all of his qualities as a reviewer. It's to the point where I don't even quite know where to start with this video. Oh, I know. Let's start with the game that I liked. Death Stranding was a game that was insanely polarizing on release, and Dunkey was no different. His criticisms were flawed, but so were most other reviewers at the time. Multiple times he completely ignores strategies and mechanics that make the game work, like refusing to get off the fucking tricycle when there are rocks in the way, or criticizing the fact that inventory items like healing and weapons are cargo on your character, despite the entire game being built around managing cargo on your character. The problem with Dunkey's review is not that he didn't like the game, but instead that he failed to understand what the game was trying to do, a problem that he fixed with the video he made revisiting Death Stranding.
The most creative thing I ever did in this game was drive a motorcycle over a ladder. Now let's try the same thing but with Joker's truck. Doesn't work. Of course it doesn't, because you can't get that creative.
This was the moment I realized this was going to be a better video than the first one. When he revisits it, he shows an understanding of the game that was not originally present. He talks about things and mechanics that the game was designed around, and criticizes things in the game based on how they impede that.
Sam will trip over a pebble but can snowboard over 10 boulders in a row. BTs can hear you breathe, but they can't hear a gigantic truck. Vehicles will get stuck on nothing, but you can also drive off of a cliff without taking damage by landing on the nose. Look, even the packages are fine.
He criticizes how inconsistent the physics in the game are, and even counters the point I made earlier in this video about vehicles on rocky terrain by saying that despite how hard it is, vehicles are still faster than walking, which in a lot of the game I feel was accurate. And on top of all of that, he actually manages to give a more thorough critique of the game's story, where instead of just showing some cringy lines of dialogue, he actually talks about how the storyline suffers from over-explanations and lack of stakes due to new plot elements being introduced constantly. I love this video. I think it's a fantastic follow-up to what I think was a flawed video. Now, with all that said, I feel like there's a video I need to talk about. I would argue that this was the start of Dunkey's current public opinion that a lot of people have about his reviews. Speaking personally, I never heard anybody talk about how much they hated Dunkey's reviews until this video. So, what did he do? What did he do that was so heinous and corrupt that it caused such a massive backlash that still goes on to this day? He didn't like the turn-based combat. Was that it? No, of course not. There were several things, but that was the main one. The main issue people had with him not liking the combat was that people thought that since Dunkey has admitted to not liking JRPGs or turn-based combat, he shouldn't be reviewing them. Now, my main counter-argument to this is that Dunkey in his review makes it clear that turn-based battles being bad is not exclusive to Octopath. He even talks about things that JRPGs that he's liked have done in order for him to like them.
If you're gonna subject me to some cringe-worthy PS2 era anime writing, at least hit me with an interesting concept. Daffy Duck meets Wreck-It Ralph. Okay, I'll play that. Pokemon meets Inception. Okay, that sounds pretty fun.
To say that Dunkey's assessment of the game's combat was bad, I feel is incorrect, because he never singles out Octopath specifically for its combat. He portrays it as an issue that he has with most of the genre. Honestly, if I could request Dunkey do anything, I would want him to do a review of the JRPG genre. Talk about the JRPGs he likes and why he likes them. Talk about the more popular JRPGs he doesn't like and what he would do to change them or fix them. Now, remember when I said earlier that his thoughts on the combat wasn't the only thing people disliked about his review? And remember even earlier when I briefly talked about how in his original Death Stranding review, he just showed cringy lines of dialogue instead of criticizing the overall story?
As you wish, Your Excellency. 15 years, Your Excellency. I was but an orphan, Your Excellency. Your Excellency!
This kindness of yours will not be your ruin.
Your Excellency?
The writing of JRPGs are like Dunkey's kryptonite. It's so easy for him to make jokes about the lines of dialogue in those games, but in doing so, he overshadows more serious criticisms he has with them. an issue that occurred with his Final Fantasy VII Remake video. The video actually did a fairly good job of criticizing the game's storyline. He talked about what happens in the whole story, and does a great job of explaining why he had such a big problem with them. But along with this, he also makes jokes about specific pieces of dialogue, which detract from his point, and make some viewers come away with a different thought about the validity of his criticisms. I feel like Dunkey's Final Fantasy VII Remake review would have been much better received if he talked more about the combat, or talked about the combat second and the writing first, and I know this because of his Resident Evil 1 review. The first half of this video is him talking about all the stuff in that game that he thinks has aged terribly, but the second half of the video is about why he still likes the game despite that. And since the stuff he likes is put in the second half of the video, you come away with that positive impression that he liked the game. If he did this with more of his reviews, I honestly think he would get way less hate than he does. Now with that said, it may be difficult to do this for a lot of games, and it's a lot harder to make comedy out of games when you like them, but when you end off talking about what you like, that's what the viewer's impression of what you think of it will be. I tend to find it interesting when people call Dunkey a bad critic, because there's a quote from the mule himself that serves as a nice counter-argument.
Listen, fucko, you don't have to see eye to eye on every single game to put your trust in someone, obviously. A critic's power lies in the consistency of their voice.
You can disagree with Dunkey's takes on slower-paced games or JRPGs, but you cannot say he is inconsistent.
Every review you do should feel like an extension of the last until your audience understands what kind of games you respond to.
And just like Dunkey, I would argue the main issue with outlets like IGN or GameSpot isn't that they're inherently bad, but instead that you can't truly know what the reviewer is like and what they respond to since there's so many reviewers in a single outlet. You can't build a relationship with a review outlet in the same way you can with a singular person, because even if you don't know them, you still understand what they like and what they don't like, and you're able to take that into account when deciding which games are and aren't worth your time. Now, with all that said, is Dunkey a bad critic? Man, I don't know.